lines, sorting through the media bias, exposing the propaganda, and challenging you to use your brain. It's time to tap into the truth.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed time to tap into the truth. Welcome to today's broadcast. Hope that you are having a great day, wherever you are and whatever you may be doing. Ladies and gentlemen, we have got another typical outrage, and it's all a matter of whether or not the United States is going to hold firm to its Constitution, or if we're simply going to move away from it. Then there are other concerns around the world that we need to be paying attention, because we are facing the very real threat of what can be described as nothing less than the full indoctrination of the Islamic system upon all nations. It has a lot to do with the simple fact that no one seems to understand that immigration requires integration. But we'll go there in the second half of the show. The first half of the show, I want to talk about something that's going on across the country. And it's, again, we're looking back to this humanitarian crisis on the United States southern border, and what is happening as a result of that crisis. Now, one of the things that has been going on is the fact that there's been an attempt at a media blackout. Now, there is a reason for this media blackout, and we saw over the course of the last few days at Breitbart.com. Why? Because some of the intel, some of the people that have been working there have had enough. They've seen what's going on, and they are now getting this information out. You can find a nice full article at Breitbart.com, but it has a lot to do with just information that's been leaked. Based out of Houston, Texas, there's an elite law enforcement sensitive El Paso Intelligence Center, EPIC. The intel report from there simply says that homicide rates in Central America suggest violence is likely not the primary cause of the surge of thousands of unaccompanied minors and incomplete family units illegally entering the United States. Now, this is not a surprise. In fact, most conservatives for a while have been pointing to the policies, if you can actually call them policies, of the occupier in regards to what's led this. But the EPIC report indicates that the belief among the illegal immigrants is that they would receive and be allowed to stay. They would be received and they would be allowed to stay. And this is the driving factor in their choice to come to the United States. And that the crisis will continue until these misperceptions about the United States immigration benefits are no longer prevalent. Now, this goes right back to what I've been saying all along, and I would love to take credit to say that I'm the only voice out there saying this, but others have been saying the same thing too, and that is the most humane thing we can do is let everyone know south of our borders that this cannot continue, so that these people stop risking their lives in an attempt to get here. The report also states that the migrants cited on Univision and other outlets as having shaped their views on U.S. immigration policy. Another implication of the report is that the family members already in the U.S. are encouraging the minors to come and organizing the travel with smugglers. Now, EPIC is a widely respected intelligence analysis group and was initially staffed by the Drug Enforcement Administration. According to the official DEA website, EPIC now contains representatives from a host of law enforcement agencies. Now, the leaked EPIC report discusses the motivational factors of the illegal immigrants and their choice to migrate to the United States. In late May, the U.S. Border Patrol interviewed unaccompanied minors and migrant families apprehended in the Rio Grande Valley. Of the 230 total migrants interviewed, 219 cited the primary reason for migrating to the United States was the perception of U.S. immigration laws granting free passes to the unaccompanied minors and to adult females traveling with minors. Migrants indicated that knowledge of these free passes was widespread across Central America due to word of mouth, local, and international media messaging. Wonder where that's coming from. This messaging promoting many to depart from the United States, depart for the United States, within 30 days of becoming aware of these perceived benefits. Now, a majority of migrants interviewed also noted that they had encountered family units consisting of a mother and child under the age of 18 during their journey to the United States, and that the families had indicated they planned to surrender to the U.S. authorities because they were informed that they would likely be released. Now, the EPIC report also discusses the lack of correlation between violence rates in Central America and the current border crisis, which we have heard the left constantly talk about as a reason why we should just welcome these poor people across our border. They're refugees. It's just not the case. These are people who are being manipulated into coming here. But what's worse is the photos of how they're being treated once they get here. In many cases, where they're being held, these detainment centers, while they're being processed, are horrible conditions. Now, if you really want to take a look at the full article, you can find it at Breitbart.com. Look at Breitbart, Texas, and you'll be looking for an article named Leaked Border Crisis Intel Shreds Narrative from Media and Obama Administration. And it does exactly that. When you take the time to actually look at what is in this report, you see that the truth of the matter is these people have, in fact, not only been encouraged by these policies, but someone is paying money to send this false message, this false narrative to the people in these countries through Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. These people are being told that they will be welcomed with open arms and they can have just anything. You'll get a free pass, we'll set you up, freebies here, freebies there, blah, blah, blah. Who's behind the messaging? Who's behind changing the law here so that an unaccompanied minor automatically qualifies for a hearing before they can be deported if they're from a non-continuous nation, which means if they are on the other side of Mexico? Since there really is no nation on the other side of Canada, it doesn't really apply in that situation. But technically, if there was another country north of Canada, then their children could come here unaccompanied, and again, they would automatically qualify for a judicial review. A judge would have to hear the case before they could be deported. Why is it so hard for people to understand the concept that deportation is the appropriate action here? Yeah, some of these people are crossing the border, especially these kids, in need of medical attention. And once they're here, it is certainly an appropriate course of action to treat them medically. But the next step, the thing is happening next, is not appropriate. These people are receiving some level of medical treatment. It's still not real clear exactly how much treatment they're getting. There are reports of both children and some adult women who are traveling with children being in these detention centers for a week or longer and then being released and immediately needing hospitalization because they are dehydrated. What kind of medical attention are you getting if you're in a location for over a week and you're still dehydrated? But again, this is the picture of compassionate caring when it's done by the government. And I don't care what government it is. The federal government is not capable of caring for people. It's not capable of creating wealth. It's not capable of creating jobs. It's not capable of a good many things. Now, it is capable of creating policies that are inducive to these things in a positive fashion. It's capable of getting out of the way and letting the private sector work, and in this case, private charity to work. That is who should be handling this crisis, by the way. The people crossing the border that are in need of help and assistance should be getting that help. I have no problem with that, no qualm. Anybody who does is basically saying that out of frustration over the fact that they see our immigration laws being ignored, and they know what our government's next step is going to be, and it is not going to be deportation. That is what it should be. These kids must be sent home. The border needs to be closed down now. Nobody else should be coming across, and these detainment centers, this should be where they're receiving their medical treatment that's necessary. It should be where they're getting processed, and this should be their jumping off point to being took back to the border in which they came. At this point in time, I would almost say that it would be good enough to just turn them back at the Mexican border, since Mexico has decided to make it okay for these people to travel through as long as they have assurances that they are in fact just traveling through. That's not something that's happened before this event. I said it the other day and I'll say it again. We, the United States, we've been accused of trying to be the world's policeman, and that's a role we should not have. I'll agree with that to a certain extent. You know, we shouldn't be the world's policeman, but we also should not be the world's nursemaid. In fact, we cannot be the world's nursemaid. We don't have the resources. We just don't. But we are a group of humanitarians. We are a group of people who, at our very core, wants to help people when we see people in need. We do this with our fellow Americans, and we do this with people outside of our borders when we see natural disasters. It's just part of who we are. It's part of our culture. So again, if these kids are crossing the border and they need medical attention, then let's give it to them. But then let's turn them back around and send them home. That's where they should be. And there's no other way that's going to get this message across that there is no free pass. But that's just it. That's where the frustration comes back. Because we know this particular administration, and unfortunately the administration before him, and the one before him, had no will to do anything about it. And the administration before that, no will to do anything about it. The administration before that made an effort that ended up being an amnesty, and nothing was solved then. Amnesty doesn't solve the problem. We have had amnesties, and they don't work. We have had immigration reform, and they don't work. And the only real reform we need is for the current laws to be enforced. And no matter what these deadhead mealy-mouthed politicians who are only concerned about getting reelected tell you they can be enforced. It requires the will, and it requires the resources. That's all. It can be done. But what is going to happen? What is the next step in what's happening here? These kids are being relocated all throughout the country. We've had states now speak up and tell the federal government, no, don't send any here. To the best of my knowledge at this point, and I have not gotten on the website to see, they have honored that from states that are controlled by Democrats. If you have a Democratic governor and a Democratic-controlled state legislature, and you stepped up and said, don't send any of them here, so far the federal government hasn't done that, as far as I can tell. I mean, this is a very fluid situation. It may have changed since the last time I looked at this information. So, again, this is an opportunity for you to do your own homework. And you can find out this information at the Health and Human Resources website at the federal level. There are links that are easy enough to find. In fact, I will see if I can't find one such link here in a minute and give it to you on the air, but at the moment, I'm going to try and stay on point. Here in the state of Tennessee, our governor made headlines. Mr. Bill Haslam wrote a letter to Barack Obama, because here's what happened in Tennessee. Governor Haslam asked the Obama administration to notify him in advance if they wanted to send illegal immigrants to Tennessee. As it turns out, he found out, as now just about everybody else in the state knows as of today, there's probably still a few folks this might be news to, that the Obama administration has in fact sent nearly 800. It was 768, I think was the official number as of the time of the letter being written. I believe it's been bumped up over 800 at this point. They had sent nearly 800 immigrants, juveniles, immigrants, illegal juvenile immigrants, sent them and just dumped them off here in Tennessee. And he found this out not from official notification from the Obama administration, not from a phone call from Barack himself. Now, not that we would expect that. He was too busy going golfing, undoubtedly. He found it out by looking at the Health and Human Services website. You're the governor of a state, and you find out that you had nearly 800 kids dropped off in your state. And you find this out because you look at a federal government website. Now, does anybody else bothered by this? Is this happening in other states too? My guess would be yes. Now, Governor Haslam slammed the Obama administration for not notifying him in advance, even after he and other governors at the July 13th National Governors Association meeting in Nashville met with the Health and Human Services Secretary, Sylvia Burwell, and they emphasize to Secretary Burwell the need to be informed of any children being relocated into the states. The federal government has certain latitude in a situation like this, but the states are still ultimately going to be the ones required to spend taxpayer money on providing care and school and other basic services to these children. Would it be so unreasonable to expect that the federal government would give the governors and the state legislatures a heads up? Quoted as saying, "It is unacceptable that we became aware via a posting on the HHS website that 760 plus unaccompanied children have been released by the Office of Refugees and Resettlement to sponsors in Tennessee without my administration's knowledge." This is a direct quote from the letter that Governor Haslam wrote to Obama. Also in that letter, directly quoted, "Not only was our state not informed prior to any of the children being brought here, I still have not been contacted and have no information about these individuals or their sponsors other than that it was posted on the HHS website and subsequently reported by the media." Haslam also said that since the, quote, influx of immigrant children could have been a significant impact on state and local governments, that he needed immediate answers concerning how the federal government located sponsors, what medical screenings and these juveniles had gone through, the immigration status of the sponsors. In other words, are you locating these kids with other illegals, or are these people actually here legally? How long the federal government plans on letting these people remain in the state of Tennessee, and more specifications concerning the overall process. Now, he said that the, quote, little information being made available to the public or to the state leaders just creates confusion and could be very problematic. For instance, Haslam said that the start of school is approaching for many districts across the state of Tennessee, and the federal government's actions have caused great uncertainty around this issue. Now, the Health and Human Services Department revealed this past Thursday that roughly 30,340 illegal immigrant juveniles have been dumped in states across the United States. Many governors found out for the first time that they had illegal immigrant juveniles in their states at that point in time. Now, a lot of people were applauding Mr. Haslam for writing this letter. It was for Bill Haslam. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, those of you who are listening from outside of the state of Tennessee, Bill Haslam is a very measured individual. He's very self-controlled, and believe me, this was Bill Haslam angry. But he's still trying to maintain a tone where he makes things clear, but still can work with these people, because Bill Haslam at no point in time had any level of "no, you can't send any of these kids here" mentality. Now, there are a lot of his constituents that probably would prefer that these illegal children not be dumped here in the state of Tennessee. But Governor Haslam saw an opportunity and understood that the spirit of the Tennessee Volunteer, that once we saw kids needing help, that we would be willing to help them in the short term. Now, while the headlines haven't exactly been making waves everywhere, the question still comes back to how many other states have had this happen? How many governors have not yet looked at this website and at this moment in time have no idea that literally hundreds, possibly thousands of these kids have already been dumped in their state. How much of a burden is this going to cause when it comes to providing school and medical care at the state taxpayers' expense? It's not a burden that we're not willing to carry, ladies and gentlemen, but it's a burden that we need to be able to prepare for. Many states across this country have been facing similar budgetary issues as the federal government, and that is there's certain groups of people that seem to have no idea that there are still limits to how much money the government can have. Therefore, there are limits to how much money the government should be spending. Whether you're talking at the federal level, the state level, or even at the local level, some of us have to deal with these things on a regular basis. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have folks that are legitimately conservative about how they're trying to operate their budgets and their government, well, those folks are in pretty good shape. But that still doesn't mean that they can just automatically absorb 1,000 or more kids, even if dispersed evenly throughout a state. Not without time to make preparations, not without a way to change the budget. I mean, it's not any different than if you're bebopping along, you have your personal monthly budget eased out, you've got a little bit of breathing room, you're trying to put a little bit aside every month, and you've got your bills just covered. Then all of a sudden, boom, something goes on with your car. Major repairs. $2,200 or more. Well, you've got to come up with the money. You got to fix your car. What does that do to your budget? Now, if you had time, if you knew this was coming and you could start squirreling away a little extra, tighten your belt a little bit more, if you had the opportunity to prepare adequately, well, while it still might be a little tough, it's not going to kill you. You've got the ability to deal with it. But in the grand scheme of things, what actually happens here is all of a sudden you don't even know these people are in your state. And the federal government did this. Barack Obama, either personally or through one of his little minions, gave an order that made this happen. The rights of the state and the ability of the state governments to do their job. Also part of the checks and balances that are provided by the United States Constitution. Heaven help us if anybody even remembers how this still works. The Constitution is there for a reason. And I don't care how many pens and how many phones Barack Hussein Obama has, it doesn't make it right, legal, or even acceptable that this man is acting on his own, ignoring duly passed and signed laws of this nation. There are laws that I don't like, but I don't get to ignore them. There are laws I'm sure that you out there, whoever's listening right now, don't like. But it doesn't mean that you get to ignore them. And the same thing is true of our elected officials, regardless of what position they have. Every single time that Barack Hussein Obama, a.k.a. the occupier, stands up and says, if Congress doesn't act, I will. He's brazenly bragging to you the fact that he doesn't see the Constitution as a restraining factor to him. He's brazenly bragging to you that he's going to violate the Constitution, which is the supreme law of our land. He's publicly admitting the grounds for impeachment. But here's the problem. Barack Obama doing that, that's not the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, it hasn't been the problem for a while. It was the problem to start with, but it's not the problem anymore. The problem now is the fact that we have a bunch of spineless cowards in the House of Representatives that claim to be leaders. People that are in the Republican Party, the opposition party at the moment, who not only are unwilling to use the constitutional grounds that they have available to them to do their job, but they do so under the guise of fear of public opinion, fear of not being able to win an election after we did this. They didn't get elected to win another election. They got elected to do a job. They begged to do this job. They raised money to do this job. They had people give them millions of dollars so they could run to do what is undoubtedly, unquestionably, one of the toughest jobs on the planet when it's done right. And there's a reason why it's tough when it's done right. Because sometimes you are not going to be popular. Sometimes when you do the right thing, public opinion is not going to swing back around to admit and see that you did the right thing until sometime down the road. You may get one term. You may not get to finish one term, but you can stand up with your head held high and say you did the job right and you did what you promised to do. And if you're going to beg to have this job, then that's what you should do. The House of Representatives has the power of the purse. They can shut off every penny to whatever projects they want to, and there's not a thing the Senate can do about it, and there's not a thing the White House can do about it. Doesn't matter how many pens and phones Barack Hussein Obama has. It doesn't matter how many parliamentary procedures Harry Reid wants to use and then throw away and reuse. It's not going to matter. The power of the purse lies solely in the House of the Representatives, because at the time of the founding of the Constitution, the House of Representatives was the House of the people. The Senate was supposed to be the House of the states. That's where the states' interests are supposed to be. That's why in the early days, senators were not elected. They were appointed by state legislatures. Why? Because they were the representatives of the state. The states are supposed to have a voice at the federal level too. What do we have? We have so-called leaders wanting to take Obama to court over his excessive use of executive authority. There is no executive authority. Executive orders have no power of law outside of the executive branch. He can set policy. He can set standards and expectations within the branch that he is governing. He does not have the constitutional authority to write something down that would have the power of law unless Congress grants him that authority via legislation. So the problem now, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that we have a House of Representatives led by supposed conservatives that are refusing to do the job because they're afraid of public opinion, because they're afraid that it might give some sympathy to the occupier, because they're afraid it might cost Republicans the next election cycle. How about, instead of worrying about the next election, we worry about having a country by the time the next election cycle comes back around? Everybody thinks that it's not possible. Everybody thinks that the United States can't possibly fail. It's too big to fail, just like a lot of banks were, right? But if you remember, without a bailout, they were done. And who is going to bail us out when we completely lose our borders, our culture, our Constitution? Who's going to bail us out? There's nowhere else. We are the shining light on the hill. We are the example to the rest of the world. We are the last best hope. We are the bastage of freedom and individual liberty. And we are those things because we honor the Constitution and we honor our founding fathers and we honor what the framers did and how they fought and scratched and clawed their way to creating a Constitution. How they fought over the fact of whether or not they should even have a Bill of Rights. Because on the one hand, They thought everything that was in it was self-evident. It wouldn't be necessary to point it out. And they were afraid that if you take the time to say, all right, we're going to list these specifically, that would mean someday some tyrannical individual or group of people in the Senate would decide we can convince the people that if it's not listed here, then it's okay for us to take it away. That's not what it was for, and that's not how it was meant, but there were some that they felt so important that it had to be enshrined. Hence, the first 10 amendments, the actual Bill of Rights. Everything else is up for debate. It's changeable, it's debatable, you can say what you want to. I'm not going to get into that this evening. But what I am going to get into the fact is that no matter how you put this, our government's out of control. And inevitably, these kids are going to get settled somewhere. And mark my words, the next step isn't to get them ready to go back home. The next step is going to be as an act of caring and compassion for us to find these kids' parents or grandparents, and who knows what level the cutoff will be, and bring them here so these families can be together. Because that'll be the compassionate thing to do. That'll be the caring thing to do. They honestly believe that they're guaranteed Democratic votes this way. That's why some people are pushing this agenda. Now, I'm running long in this segment, so I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. But keep in mind, this is the big deal. Bill has them. Yeah. The letters is a good starting point. But here's the next starting point. How about us taking the steps to shut down our border to federal intervention? Seems extreme, doesn't it? Seems like we're quickly headed towards the exact same type of situations and animosity that led to the War of Northern Aggression, as it's called in these parts. The War of Succession, which would be a far more accurate depiction, but most commonly referred to, albeit technically inaccurate, the American Civil War. And it wasn't a civil war, not accurately described, because a civil war means you've got two or more factions fighting for control of the same government. The War of Secession was about the individual states' rights to withdraw from the federation that was the United States at that time and form their own alliances elsewhere. So much for the history legend. 30,340 illegals admitted as of Thursday, according to a report from the Health and Human Services Department's official Office of Refugee Resettlement. 30,340 scattered throughout the country. The agency noted that the sponsors are adults who can suitably provide for the child's physical and mental well-being and have not engaged in any activity that would indicate a potential risk to the child. Curious as to exactly how extensive these background checks were. They also claim that the juveniles with contagious diseases still aren't being released. But evidently this has been going on since October of last year. Since October of last year, there have been nearly 60,000 illegal immigrant children who have been apprehended, and officials expect 150,000 more in the next fiscal year. Texas State Senator Dan Patrick has said that somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 10 illegal immigrants are actually apprehended. Now, these numbers are likely to drastically increase as more illegal immigrant children are put through the system. New York is expecting 7,000 more of these kids in the next few months. That according to the New York Immigration Coalition and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's office. Governors and officials in states like Arizona, Nebraska, and Maine have not been notified before illegal immigrant children were dumped in their states. We can add Tennessee to that list. States that have received more than 1,000 illegal immigrant juveniles this year include California, Virginia, New York, Texas, Maryland, Florida, Georgia, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Louisiana. In case you didn't know, the breakdown as of last Thursday, 407 in Alabama, 5 in Alaska. They took the time to send 5 kids to Alaska. 186 in Arizona, 166 in Arkansas, 3,150 in California, 221 in Colorado, 325 in Connecticut, 117 to Delaware, 187 to the District of Columbia, 3,181 in Florida, 1,154 to Georgia, 8 to Hawaii. They sent some of these kids to Hawaii. 8 to Idaho, 305 to Illinois, 245 to Indiana, 122 to Iowa, 179 to Kansas, 237 to Kentucky, 1,071 to Louisiana, 8 to Maine, 2,205 to Maryland, 773 to Massachusetts, 92 to Michigan, 173 to Minnesota, 179 to Mississippi, 121 to Missouri, 1 to Montana, 192 to Nebraska, 122 to Nevada, 13 to New Hampshire, 1,504 to New Jersey, 18 to New Mexico. How does only 18 end up in New Mexico? I'm curious about that. 3,347 to New York, 1,191 to North Carolina, 4 to North Dakota, 360 to Ohio, 212 to Oklahoma, 50 to Oregon. Now, with as many as in California, I would think Oregon would have at least been over 500, not right at 50. Pennsylvania, 386, Rhode Island, 119, South Carolina, 350, South Dakota, 21, Tennessee, 760, Texas, 4,280, Utah, 87, Vermont, 3, the Virgin Islands, 4, the Virgin Islands, people, Virginia, 2,234, Washington State, 211, West Virginia, 10, Wisconsin 50, Wyoming 6. That's the breakdown, as officially read as of last Thursday. How does this happen, ladies and gentlemen? How is this going on? If we're sending some to the freaking Virgin Islands, why haven't we sent some to Puerto Rico? Wouldn't some of these kids actually fit in a little bit better in Puerto Rico? Seeing as Spanish is the primary language spoken there, and they would, being of Hispanic descent, be able to fit in culturally just a little bit better. I mean, it's not the same culture. I'm not saying that it is. But just saying, wouldn't they fit in a little better there than in Hawaii? Than in Alaska? And why is this website the first indication of what's going on? I don't understand. How does this administration continue to get away with this stuff? It's almost as if Barack Obama now is daring the House of Representatives to impeach him. It's almost like they've convinced themselves that if they do impeach him, it will only serve to help them in the next election cycle too. Maybe that's the whole lie that they've been telling, to try and convince the Republicans of this. Or maybe, just maybe, they already understand what a bunch of gutless wonders these so-called leaders happen to be, and they know there's no threat. Maybe it's just that simple. Maybe it's the fact that they know there is no threat. Now, I'm going to take a quick break. We're going to switch gears because I came across an article from the other day that I really wanted to touch on, having to do with the United Kingdom and their recent drive to try and build up reserves in their military. So stay with me. We'll be right back.
Tap into the truth. Check us out at tapintothetruth.com for our latest blog posts and for links to all of our past broadcasts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. That's Tap Into the Truth right here on Spreaker Radio.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and thank you for staying with us through the break. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everybody that the music you hear during the breaks are provided here via Magnatune. If you're a podcaster and you're looking for podcast-safe music, you might want to check them out. One thing that I really like about them is the fact that you pay a fee, and that they were working with completely independent artists. These are the artists that do not have the major record deals. These folks are out there trying to make it on their own. That idea appeals to me a great deal, and I pretty much mention that all the time. I am not getting any kickback. In fact, I'm still paying the fees, same as everybody, but I found it to be a very nice way to get some really good music. And, you know, it's nice to help out independent artists that are trying to make their own way. I just like that. At any rate, let's go ahead and let's get back to the show, shall we? Alright, I went to the break talking about an article that I came across. Initially, the actual article itself is at the Alan West site. So if you want to look, alanbwest.com. This was posted a couple of days ago, back on the 26th, and it was actually written by Alan himself. But he's basically started out talking about one of the little secrets that you wouldn't know was going on if your only sources of information was the liberal media and the mainstream media, which is one and the same. Most of the mainstream media in this country is extremely to the left, and they're trying to help protect the agenda. But the article started out talking about a scheduled protest at the White House, or at least it's close to the White House you can get. It was in front of the White House. This protesting the fact that in the Middle East, Christians right now are being slaughtered, primarily by ISIS, as they make their way through Syria and make their way through Iraq. They're taking the time to actually find Christian families, and they're marking the doors with the letter N, standing for Nazarene. They followed the Nazarene. They believed the Nazarene. And for those of you who are not as familiar with the Christian faith, that's a reference to Jesus, okay? Jesus of Nazareth, the Nazarene. I try not to make any assumptions about the listening audience, especially those who might just accidentally stumble across the podcast and are listening to see if there's some new information, something maybe you've never heard, or just want to see how crazy this guy behind the microphone really is. Because I know a lot of liberals think that if you're conservative, you've got to be a nut job. And why not? Because all the Hollywood images kind of reinforces that notion. Anyway, back to the point. He was talking about this rally to support Middle East Christians. He was also trying to get people to sign up for a petition if they couldn't be there. But in reference to it, he started talking about something that was going on in England. Seems that there were two concurrent calls for support. One is for the Army Reservists, and the other one, not so jolly. In fact, it's a rather disturbing reflection of the policies of multiculturalism and coexistence. Remember earlier I mentioned the fact of having immigration without integration. That's what this is, this multiculturalism and coexistence. Having people come in and then letting them just continue to be who they are with their own individual culture, instead of letting them honor the culture of the past, but that they have to embrace the culture in which they're moving into. Now, the UK Daily Mail reported that more British citizens signed up to go fight in Iraq and Syria. Pay attention. This part's important, hence the dramatic pause. More British citizens signed up to fight in Iraq and Syria than joined the Army Reserve last year. In fact, just 170 extra reservists enlisted over the past year, despite a government target to boost the standby force by 11,000 by 2018. Oh, but at the same time, the very brutal Al-Qaeda-inspired ISIS, well, their forces that are tearing through Iraq right now, decimating Iraq, well, they've been boosted by several hundred Brits. Now, I want you to take a little time to digest what was just said. More British citizens signed up to fight in the Middle East for ISIS than to fight for their own country as reservists. Now, this goes beyond the scope of homegrown terrorism. It's now a clear and present danger to the stability of Western civilization as we know it. And this is not an exaggeration. Today, one of the big stories floating around the internet was the story of the latest jihadist video that's been put up from a guy who's went overseas to fight from the state of Florida. And I think I've already mentioned, I know most of us have seen all of these protests supporting Hamas in Florida over the last little bit. How bad has this gotten? I mean, just the other day, it has been officially shifted that ISIS has moved from being just a terrorist organization to being a full-blown army. To put this all in a historical sense, there were Americans of German descent who left the country and fought on the side of Germany. These individuals were highly effective when they were dropped behind enemy lines and caused disruptions in our operations. Why? Because they looked like Americans and they talked like Americans and they knew American culture. Once again, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Just as those young Germans felt a calling for their homeland, these unassimilated Muslims and some converts They have a calling to jihad. And for all of you apologists out there, this is not about some inner struggle. It's about weakening a nation. It's about wreaking death and destruction. That's not an inner struggle. That's an attempt to claim your ultimate prize of entry into heaven and have your 72 virgins waiting for you when you get there. According to the teachings of Muhammad, the only guarantee to heaven is to be martyred. It's the only way to be sure. You don't have to do it to get in, but it's the only way to be guaranteed. Also, the Daily Mail reported that terror experts believe there could be as many as 500 Brits fighting along the jihadists in the Middle East for ISIS, which, in case you are new to the game, ISIS stands for Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Okay. A senior government minister in the UK was quoted as saying there is a real problem about people going in and being radicalized and then coming home. There are several hundred who have gone from Britain that we know of. This is a worry. To get to Iraq, most of them will have to go through Syria. So the two are connected. Now, Foreign Secretary William Hague admitted that the Brits will inevitably be fighting alongside ISIS, which he called the most violent and brutal militant group in the Middle East. And, just FYI, folks, he's right. Now, Hugh also said that, quote, as I've previously told this House, we estimate the number of UK-linked individuals fighting in Syria to include approximately 400 British nationals and other UK-linked individuals who could present a particular risk should they return to the UK. He said that some of these inevitably are fighting with ISIS. Shadow Defense Secretary Vernon Coker said that this revelation was humiliating for the country and needed to be tackled. He said that the government's own figures show more UK citizens are joining ISIS than signing up for the Armed Forces Reserve. He said, quote, this is shameful, embarrassing, and will cause deep concern. Shameful, embarrassing, deep concern. What about downright dangerous? What about out of control? What about riots on your own streets? What about when the jihadists come to take down the last vestiges of Western civilization? You can bet if there was a crackdown on Islamic jihadist activities in the UK, all of the apologists would come out and complain. I mean, just look at how many people joined in to protest in support of Hamas against Israel. Remember, Hamas is a terrorist organization, ladies and gentlemen. They started the fighting there. They're hiding under hospitals. They're hiding under schools. They built tunnels so they can shoot at innocent Israelis. And yet the media still makes them out to be the victims. How anybody buys that is beyond me. But let's go back to England. There are neighborhoods in England right now where law enforcement stays away because Sharia rules. Let me say that again. There are neighborhoods in England where law enforcement stays the heck out because Sharia law is in full effect. They go into those neighborhoods, they're not safe. They can't enforce anything. They can't enforce British law because in those neighborhoods, it is Sharia. Now, the government has allowed that to happen. I mean, at what level of a disastrous surrender of the British rule of law? The same thing they're trying to do here in the United States, by the way. Every time you hear a community say, why can't we just be under Sharia law? This is how we deal with... Because eventually they want to completely ignore American law. Just like they are already completely ignoring British law. Just like they're already completely ignoring French law in the French regions where you have Muslims trying to institute their own communities and their own Sharia. How many of you people remember Lee Rigby? Let me remind you. British soldier who, just this past year, was brutally murdered in broad daylight by 2 Nigerian Muslim jihadists living in Britain. We talked about that on our show here. We discussed it in depth. You can find in the archives over at Blog Talk. Go to Blog Talk. Find Happen to the Truth. You'll find the show. Now, I know that, generally speaking, people as a rule have very short memories, especially over things that they don't want to remember. And these images are something that most people would try to repress. So there is no sense of total recall. I don't expect you to necessarily remember a whole lot about this at this point, because once the story was reported, it was just dead after that. But I won't forget. I don't think I can ever get the images of this man standing in front of one of the many cameras with Lee Rigby's blood all over him, posing for the camera and delivering a speech of jihad, a speech of hatred, a speech of how the Islamic fundamentalists were going to come and take over the world, and how all the rest of us are worthless, how we're dirty. What was the response? For those of you who do remember this, those of you who don't, please go back. Google British soldier Lee Rigby, R-I-G-B-Y. Refresh your memory, and then refresh yourself on what the response was. What was the response? Everyone from all around the world, not just the British Parliament, but around the world. Restraint. Don't blame the Muslims. Don't blame Islam. Well, this is what you get for weakness, England. Weakness is an enticement to these type of monsters. You are weak, they are strong. They destroy you from within, and they are patient. And yes, the $64,000 question: how many have departed from our own American shores to go fight beside ISIS? We know of some. Some have made headlines. Some have made the internet circles. Like I told you, the guy from Florida, for example, who's the star of the latest jihad video. I mean, maybe, just maybe, how serious the situation might finally be beginning to sink in, at least to the folks in England. It may be already too late there. But maybe there's still hope. Again, the Daily Mail reports that UK Immigration and Security Minister James Brokenshire has warned any Brits considering joining the battle abroad that they will face jail in Britain for any terror-related offenses, even if they're carried out abroad. He also says that, quote, the Serious Crime Bill would extend to reach of the Terrorism Act of 2006. So the UK-linked individuals and those who seek to harm UK interests, who travel overseas to prepare or train more generally for terrorism, can be prosecuted as if their actions had taken place in the UK. But see, here's the deal. There has to be a law clearly defining that on the 21st century battlefield, if you depart your country of citizenship and travel to ally yourself with Islamic terrorist organizations, you have in turn renounced your citizenship and become an unlawful enemy combatant. Excuse me. If engaged on the battlefield, you will be treated as the enemy, because you are. You chose to be the enemy. If captured on the battlefield, you will have lost your rights and will be treated as the enemy. No right to due process that the citizens of your nation would ordinarily afford you, or the citizens of your nation would ordinarily be afforded. Now, of course, the problem is that here we afford the enemy constitutional rights anyway. In fact, since the Obama administration took over here in the United States, the enemy has been offered up more constitutional rights and protections than actual citizens have. I mean, if we didn't do this, it would eliminate all the angst about the fate of Anwar al-Awlaki and his ilk. This is a very serious issue. And I suppose that maybe that's part of the problem, because it's just way too serious to disturb the fundraiser in chief. But at what point are we going to wake up and realize what level the threat is? Now, I have came out publicly and renounced Islam. I have, in fact, even went so far as to state that it is not actually a religion. I have received death threats for making that statement. They certainly seemed as if it was from actual Muslims who were genuinely upset by it. But, I can't be guaranteed, because nobody took any actions. I haven't had to fend anyone off from my home. I haven't had to defend myself in any fashion. I've gotten to remain a relatively anonymous voice behind a microphone when it comes to these statements. But within my profile, you can find where I am. I'm not a difficult person to find. If someone wanted to act on these threats, they certainly could have made an attempt. I'm not a particularly easy target, necessarily. But these statements were made out of anger and out of hurt. So, understand that while I do see Islam as a threat to individual freedom-loving people across the world, that I do also recognize the fact that not everyone that subscribes to this system of living is intent on going around and force converting or killing everyone that's not part of this system of living. But ISIS continues to grow in numbers. And they do so by recruiting foreign nationals. They do so by bringing people from Western civilizations. They're taking people that have become disenchanted with the lack of morality, with the lack of clarity, And they want to do only one thing, and that's purge the world of the infidels. Something like that can be very appealing to a disenfranchised youth. There are a ton of people that don't seem to understand, that don't quite get the fact that things are supposed to be hard sometimes. You're supposed to build and develop your character by facing adversity. It is part of the human condition. Diversity is a necessity. Adversity is a necessity. And we have got to move away from the concept and the idea of multiculturalism. We have got to stop allowing immigration without integration. And for anybody that stands up and says that something as asinine as, well, we've been doing that forever, they're wrong. There's a reason why every nation has immigration laws, while they have steps in place for reasonable immigration. And it's because they're trying to help them to integrate into the culture that exists. Whether you want to quote Dr. Michael Savage, Borders, Language, Culture, or whether you want to quote Dr. Mark Levin. Professor Levin is fond of explaining to you why the Constitution is a necessity. But you have people in this country right here, right today, that want to convince you that the Sharia and the Constitution can coexist. I tell you, it cannot. And anybody who truly understands both knows that immediately. Now, there's a chance that some of the people telling you that either just don't know any better, maybe they don't understand enough of one or the other, and they're taking someone else's word for it. But there's also just as likely a chance that the person knows for a fact that they are lying to you, to your face, when they tell you that. But they're banking on the fact that we won't know any better. They're banking on the fact that you're going to feel bad for them. They're hoping that you're not going to understand that you're being fed a group of lies. You're being fed lies so that you can be conquered. Going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to close up the show, so please stay with us. I'll be right back.
One step out the door and I fall through to a whole new world. It kind of hurt. There was nothing wrong as the people sat and sang along.
Tap into the truth. Check us out at tapintothetruth.com for our latest blog posts and for links to all of our past broadcasts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. That's Tap Into the Truth right here on Spreaker Radio.
She's
right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for staying with us. I am back right here with you as always. I am your host, Tim Tapp, coming to you live from historic Roane County, Tennessee. Not that that matters much to you, wherever you're listening from, and I do hope you are enjoying the show. All right. Whether you're listening live here at Spreaker, or whether you're catching us via a link on Facebook or Twitter, whether you're finding it as a podcast, again, here at Spreaker, or podcasts at iTunes, or at Stitcher.com, or at TuneIn.com. Notice there's been a few more follows at both of those websites, and that more people have found the show, and that the listens are really starting to increase lately from our non-direct sources. And I want to take a few minutes to thank you for listening. And one of the reasons that I wait till closer to the end of the show to give that thanks is because if you've listened this far, then you really, really deserve those thank yous. At any rate, let's kind of get back to things. We've touched on the fact that these illegal kids are being dumped throughout the country. And dumped is an appropriate word because these kids don't know where they're going. They're not being treated particularly well in the detainment centers, and they're not going through adequate screening processes to find good placement. When the bottom line is the best placement has got to be back to their homes. And of course the excuses have been, well, they don't remember where they came from. I've heard that more than once. I'm not sure I buy that. I certainly hope no one else is. Then we talked about ISIS and how it's growing. And in this recent article where Britain, over the course of the last years, had more of its citizens go join ISIS to fight in Syria and Iraq than they had to join their own military reserves. That's a scary thing. But to show you how out of touch the whole support of terrorists and of radical Islam is, I want to take a look at these tunnels that Hamas has been building and just basically look at how much it costs. Literally, the price of Hamas's tunnel. One tunnel takes 350 truckloads of building materials. 350. With the same materials that Hamas used to make one of their tunnels, they could have built 86 homes. They could have built 7 mosques. They could have built 6 schools. They could have built 19 standard medical clinics. Each one of these tunnels costs roughly $3 million U.S. And so far, the Israeli Defense Force has found 30 tunnels that have been verified and certified, Hamas tunnels. They're finding more. 30 will not be the final number, but they found so far 30 according to official numbers. That's $90 million that Hamas could have invested in the welfare of the people that it's supposed to be governing. Think about that. Again, dramatic pause. $90 million that it spent building tunnels to attack innocent Israelis. I want to refer you to the Patriot Factor blog. It's an op-ed blog run by a friend of the show, Diane Sorty. In fact, Diane has been a guest on the show a few times on the Blog Talk version. And I consider myself fortunate to know her. She is very, very passionate. She's very opinionated. And she writes a daily op-ed piece and today's topic was the truth about the Palestinian myth. And I wanted to go over some of that with you today before signing off. Because the truth of the matter is that the people that claim to be Palestinians today are mostly Jordanian refugees. And the reason they're refugees is because they were tossed out of Jordan for trying to overthrow the royal family. She doesn't really touch on that particular historical fact, but she does go over a lot of stuff, and I would very much like to go over this, and I would remind you that you can find the Patriot Factor online. In fact, thepatriotfactor.blogspot.com, and you can find several of her op-eds, and this one I think is particularly poignant given today's topics and as we transition from ISIS back to another part of what's wrong in the Middle East. Now, Israel is once again at war with those who just want to wipe her out. Hamas has in its charter that it wants to destroy Israel. It wants to kill every last Jew. Now, the nation that only wants to live in peace is fighting for its very survival yet again as Barack Hussein Obama funds Israel's enemies and ties her request for emergency aid to an immigration bill that has no business even existing. And now with the Israeli Defense Forces' discovery of more than 30 Hamas-dug tunnels dug to infiltrate Israel from under the border, it's more important than ever to understand the truth about Gaza. One of the so-called occupied territories, of course the other one being the West Bank. But you see, Obama and the media do not want the American people to know the truth. So, here it is, since you're not going to find it from them. And it starts with the fact that Gaza is nothing but a complete and total welfare state, as its economy and budget exists solely at the discretion of foreign aid, especially primarily U.S. foreign aid. And the UN caters to those in Gaza. The countries of the world cry for those in Gaza, and the media paints Israel as the aggressor and the enemy of those in Gaza every time something comes along. Remember what I told you about that $90 million? All that comes from foreign aid. They have no economy of their own. But those in Gaza, the so-called Palestinians, who the world cries for, are simply an invented people. A people made up to aid Yasser Arafat in his PLO endeavors. In fact, the term Palestinian people was first used in the preamble of the 1964 PLO charter drafted in Moscow and included a statement calling for the destruction of the State of Israel. A statement that even today has not been removed from said charter. And only after this charter was affirmed by the first 422 members of the Palestinian National Council, by members handpicked by the KGB, no less, did the term Palestinians become part of the media jargon. And lest we forget, no matter what the media or the occupiers say, today's so-called Palestinians are just regular, Arabs. No different than any other Arabs who populate the Middle East. And their sole claim to having their own state at the expense of Israel is their warped belief that they're the original inhabitants of the land. Inhabitants that were driven out ages ago by those who actually were the keepers of the land. That, of course, being the Jews. The Jews of the Old Testament, to be more specific. With Israel being a Jewish nation 2,000 years before Islam existed, before Islam was even a glimmer in Muhammad's twisted mind. In fact, the so-called Palestinians are descendants of Muslims conquerors who drove the Jews out of their ancestral homeland long ago. A homeland the Jews had dominion over for 1,000 years, with a continuous presence in that region for the past 3,300 plus years, making the so-called Palestinians nothing but non-indigenous colonizers who overran the land in tribal groups. Excuse me. In fact, the very name Palestine itself is just the Romanized version of the word Philistia, the name given to the region by Rome in the 1st century. And naming it for the Philistines, who were enemies of the Jews, was done as an insult to the injury of their enslavement. The name Palestine stayed through the ensuing centuries as the name recognized mostly by the European nations, and as more Arabs flooded into the area as the Byzantine Empire was collapsing. Even those settling in had no name for themselves other than just being called Arabs, for they knew they had no history with the land upon which they lived. And at the end of the British Mandate period in 1947, when UN Resolution 181 recommended a partition of the territory into 2 states, one for the Jews, that would be Israel, and one for the Arabs, that would be Transjordan, the Arabs rejected said recommendation, because for them it was all or nothing. And we see that still today. So the Jews were given back what they, the UN, considered to be the whole of their ancestral lands after the nightmare of the Holocaust that defined World War II. And the Jews called the whole of that land Israel, the name originally given to the land by God, at least according to the biblical belief, in the event that you don't subscribe to such things. Now, with the once called Palestine officially becoming the State of Israel in 1948, every nation in the world recognized the new nation of Israel by international agreements. In fact, the first time an Arab country had any agreement of any kind with Israel, and that includes simple trade agreements or even accepted Israeli help in times of a disaster. They recognized the fact of Israel being a sovereign nation, as this is what's known as the right of recognition. And know that every Arab nation has done so at one time or another, to some degree, over the ensuing 65 plus years. Now that brings us back to the non-existent Palestinian people themselves. Once again, there are no Palestinian people, just like there's no Jordanian people, no Egyptian people, no Syrian people. Just different clans living behind a set of borders drawn up by Europeans in the 20th century. This translates into a simple fact, which many still refuse to accept, that these so-called Palestinians really have no national identity, no culture, or true religious identity that would make them a people. as their identity rests solely on the claim of their existence. Now, this is typically where I lose a lot of folks. They get upset when their identity, because they don't understand what's being said here. And when you start saying things like there's no Jordanian people, no Egyptians, no Syrians, then they're really like, they think you're nuts because they don't understand what is being said. So let me say this part again. The so-called Palestinians are indeed devoid of all things that make a people a nation. For to be a nation, one must have a history. The so-called Palestinians really have no national identity. No individual culture that is truly Palestinian culture. No true religious identity that's uniquely theirs. They are either Muslims or they're not. But they have no Palestinian specific. As their identity rests solely on their being Arabs. The Palestinians are devoid of all things that make a people a nation. For to be a nation, one must have a history. Now remember, the Palestinians and what they call their Palestinian nation had no founders, except Yasser Arafat, on paper. No borders, no major cities, and no capital. And while they want Israel's capital of Jerusalem as their own, that will never happen because Jerusalem is mentioned over 800 times in the Bible. It is not mentioned by name even once in the Quran. Mecca, yeah. Jerusalem? No. Their so-called Palestinian nation has no succession of presidents or leaders, no economy of its own except, again, like we mentioned, the one other nations give to them. They have no official currency, no official language, no unique official religion. And Palestine as a nation was never recognized by any other nation as to actually being a nation. So with no Palestine existing today, the critical points of what caused its demise and when did said demise occur, none of that ever happened. Necessary points in the life and death of a true nation and its people. And most importantly, if today's so-called Palestinians are anything but a hodgepodge collection of Arabs from all over the Arab world, and if they really do have a specific ethnic identity that gives them the right to self-determination, then why didn't they ever try to become an independent nation before the 6-Day War? And why did they only wait until after Arafat told them to push themselves onto the world that they do so? Again, go out on a limb here and say it's because there is and never was a nation called Palestine. And there is and never was a Palestinian people. Period. There are terrorists who call themselves Palestinians, Hamas being a case in point. There is the media giving credence to anything but credible rants of those trying to sell the Palestinian myth. And of course, there is and will always be the haters of Israel and of the Jewish people. Anti-Semitism has been reborn. And thanks in no small part to an American president, so-called, who stabs Israel in the back every single chance he gets. And as the Palestinian myth has taken on a life of its own, so must the Palestinian myth die. Not on its own, but with the help of Americans standing strong and proud with its friend and ally, Israel. But I won't hold my breath for that to happen with the current man occupying the White House. Now, I paraphrased a lot through there. But the bottom line is simple. She makes points arguing semantics. And, they're legitimate points from a historical point of view. And historically, again, accurately, she is hitting on all cylinders. But you see, here's the biggest crime that's been committed on the so-called Palestinians. And that is, most of them alive today have never been told anything other than the lie that they are Palestinians and that is historically their land. They don't know any better. How they feel about it isn't even really so much their own fault as it is the faults of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers for not opening up. But again, in the tribal mentality that exists throughout the Arab world, the women don't have much room, even in the pre-Islamic Arab tribal activities. They've been sold a lie too. But there are many Arabs that peacefully live inside the Israeli borders. Israel has shown time and time again they want nothing more than to live in peace. And groups like Hamas have shown time and time again that they're not willing to be peaceful with the Jewish people. So all throughout the Middle East, Christians are being targeted and killed. Jews are being targeted and killed. Radical Islam is on the march and stronger than ever. And Western civilization sees its own citizens turning its back on the concepts of liberty and justice to embrace the ideologies of Islam. But we're not supposed to be concerned about that. Ladies and gentlemen, how are we not? How are we not concerned that this is going on here and in England and in France? Throughout the free world, people are free to choose a religion. People are free to choose a course of action. And once you're an adult, if you're going to be as dumb as to fall for the preachings of the death cult, whether it's because you think you're going to get rewarded with those 72 virgins, or whether it's because you think that capitalism is bad because it's kept you down, or kept your family down, or whatever your holdup is, you're going to have to live with those choices. And hopefully it will only be you that has to live with that. Because the real danger is when you make innocent people pay for your mistakes. We live in a very dangerous world, and sometimes here in the United States, we don't always understand how dangerous the rest of the world really is and can be. We don't get it because we don't see it, unless we're unfortunate enough to live in and around places like Detroit, Los Angeles, New York. And even then, Los Angeles and New York has its better places. New York's nowhere near as bad as it used to be, even since Rudy Giuliani's departure. Violence hasn't gotten crazy again. But as it comes down, you look at places like Detroit, and it's a war zone. There are parts of Detroit that look like parts of Baghdad. It's not just a joke. It's the way it is. So, what do? You have to recognize it for what it is. You have to recognize the truth and understand that we live in a dangerous world. This world only continues to get more dangerous when we ignore the threats of things like radical Islam. It continues to get more dangerous when we leave our borders wide open for anybody to come across, whether they're gangsters, drug runners, gun runners, infected children bringing communicable diseases, whatever the issue may be. The borders must be closed so that we can control the flow of people. We don't want an end to immigration, but we want a legal, orderly immigration where the people that we want are the ones who are coming across, and so that the people that we can at least run background checks and find out how dangerous they are can be stopped at the border if that's what needs to happen. There are gang members coming across the border, but all we're talking about are the children. There should be no adults being allowed to cross the border under any circumstances. And if these kids need whatever type of medical aid they need, if they are with a parent, then fine. Let the parent cross at that point and stay with the child while they receive medical care. And then, as a nice, happy little group, this family needs to go back. Compassion is one thing. National suicide is another. But this all starts at the House of Representatives. The end to this must also start at the House of Representatives. The power of the purse must be used. The Constitution must be reinstituted, and limits on our federal government and limits on our state governments by voting and elections must be put back in place. The time of everyone sitting back and pretending like it's okay or there's nothing we can do about it, that has to come to an end. Because, like I said before, by ourselves, there isn't much we can do about it. But together, as we, the people, there's no limit to what we can make happen. We can change the world. And I know that to be true, because we've done it before. That's got to be it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate the fact that you guys hang with me and listen to all these ramblings. Be sure to tune in again on Wednesday when we'll be back on the air. And if you're catching the podcast, you should still be able to find it by Wednesday. That's it. Don't take my word for it, though. Definitely don't take their word for it. Take a little time, do your own research, look some of this stuff up yourself, find out the truth for yourself, because you should always be prepared to put in a little bit of your own effort if you really want to tap into the truth. That's it. Goodbye, everybody, and we will see you again soon.
She had me love